Well, hello everyone. Today I'm in conversation with Stephen Pane in the US, and he has undertaken over a number of years a virtual exchange which focuses on music. But before we get stuck into that, Stephen, please introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do and where you're joining us from.
Hello, I'm Steven Pane. I teach music at the University of Maine at Farmington. I'm a pianist and also very active in interdisciplinary music courses. We're a small liberal arts college where there's a lot of crossover. And I've been here for almost 30 years, so it's been quite a ride.
Tell us a little bit about the history of your virtual exchange and who are your partners? Who do you do it with? And tell us a bit of background to that.
Sure. Well, I've done a lot of travel courses to Italy over my career with some terrific colleagues, Scott Erb in political science. And one of the things we've always wanted to do was to kind of get past the visiting barrier, right? To get to actually know and engage with Italians. So I became interested as Linda Beck began to create more opportunities for virtual exchange in creating a class where there was a connection between my students and students in Italy. I do speak a little bit of Italian. It made sense to go that direction. Also, with all the trips I did to Italy, it's become sort of my area of focus. We ended up through Lynn Eustace, who had attended another workshop, had met Cecilia Franchini, who is the professor of chamber music at the Conservatory of Music in Venice. And she often, through Erasmus, works with her sister, Stefania, who is the chamber music professor at the Music Conservatory in Pescara. So they had been looking for a partner. I was looking for a partner, and we got together. And I'm sorry, I can't remember, it was 21 or 22, going by so fast. But we did a virtual exchange, and it focused on the idea of music and water. Cecilia in Venice in fact, has another conference coming up in July, there is a sort of cross-institutional conference in July in Venice that looks at issues of water from all sorts of different perspectives. And so we sort of, although we're not associated with that conference, we wanted to play at that theme. And one of the initial challenges we were concerned about became one of the strengths, and that was our students are so different. Music conservatory students, and I'm a music conservatory student myself, your 90% of your courses, 100% are all in music. My students are a diversity of majors who take general education courses. These are two very different student experiences. What we found was that actually they were fascinated by each other and really appreciated the difference and what the other was able to do.
Tell us a bit more, to expand a bit more about the background, because our listeners, our viewers are not going to understand those nuances so much. So tell us a bit more about the backgrounds to your students.
As a music conservatory, and again, I went to a music conservatory for my undergraduate and graduate years. You really are a specialist, and your focus is primarily performing or composing.
Right.
You don't take courses in science. You don't take courses outside of music, it's all about the career and fostering that type of engagement. Our school is small. We have very small majors with just a few faculty. And so our strength is actually, if you do music at UMF, it's that you are taking maybe 35, 40% of your courses in music, but then the rest of it in other fields. And also other fields which might cross over into music. There might be interdisciplinary courses. My courses tend to be music, and the course I did this past semester was music and environment. I do have a course, music and technology, music philosophy. And so it's an interdisciplinary looking program. The other big difference between the two schools that became very apparent when the Italians came this past last month was most Italian colleges and universities don't have campuses. And so we are a residential campus, and actually that's one of our niche things within the system. So again, for the Italian students looking at our students who actually are living for 4 years at their college, and what that's like.
I mean, this is a very unusual virtual exchange, and I suppose our viewers and other academics interested in doing virtual exchange will be really wondering, how does that work with music? What are the nuts and bolts? How has your virtual exchange been constructed over the years, and how does that work in practice?
What we've learned, at least from our experience,
Yes, because
is
it's an up and down,
yeah,
mistakes and learning curve, isn't it?
go very easy on outcomes and assessment. Um, they can get in the way.
Yes.
And what you plan, if you stick with it too hard, can constrict, and actually can undermine the experience
Right.
unintentionally. Um, very early on, I think the thing that Cecilia, Stefania, and I kind of agreed on is we wanted to not have outcomes and learning things. We wanted to create an atmosphere where the students could genuinely engage each other.
So it was
And
an experience and a process rather than
yeah,
focusing on results.
exactly. A lot of that was just sort of setting something up and seeing what happens. It's like a musical performance. I speak as a performer. You can plan and plan and plan and plan and get on the stage and be awful. Sometimes you just let go and it happens, right? It comes together. There's this thing that goes beyond what we can control. And so what we did was we really wanted the students to talk to each other about their schooling, right? So we kept the project very loose. And instead, what we focused is on, and we told the students also to take the pressure off of product. And also the product could be incomplete. And that really what we were after was process, and that they have conversations with each other, that they share and provide feedback on each other's work, and that we be very keen, be very aware to suddenly change on a dime, like suddenly this project that this group has turned into something different. And also to bend rules, in the sense that in terms of the medium that they wanted to do, we found that very quickly, rather than saying everybody is going to do a video or everyone's going to do a podcast of things, we said it's open. What we needed to be careful with the students was just sometimes to remind them that if they've never done video before, maybe video is not the way to go, right? And podcasts and all of that. And also keep reminding them and us that at the first one, we only had 5 weeks. So we were moving fast. And really, I think our feeling was we wanted the students to walk away really thinking this was really worth it and something I had never experienced before. And, I don't know if it happened after the first time, but, we said it would be really great if you had some friends in Italy now, right? I said to my students, and, that you could keep in touch with.
I do want to ask you about the impact on the students, but before we do that, can I just backpedal a bit? You talked about your virtual exchange over 5 weeks, which is quite short, but pretty average.
Right.
Can I ask you about the nuts and bolts about how you organize the students? I mean, were they in groups? Did they work in pairs or groups, or how did that happen? And did they work synchronously and asynchronously? Tell us a bit about the nuts and bolts.
Absolutely. So we put them in groups, and it was required that we have at least one person from each school. And we had more Americans than we did Italians. So there tended to be, thinking back now, there might have been 2 or 3 Americans to 1 Italian, or to 2 Italians, but from the 2 different schools. We had them work synchronously during the class. And this was one of the things that was really important because it was very, very hard. So you have the time difference, but then you also have performing musicians who are, have various gigs and things at other times. Yeah. So some of the groups did meet at other times, but we didn't want that to be the majority of the time that they would be doing the work. To put any weight on that would be dangerous. And so I think, and it was a smart decision that we didn't know was a smart decision at the time, but we thought, okay, let's go in easy. And that is, the first half of the class would be them working in a group. We would, prompt them, here's what you want to do. The second half of the class, you need to come back and report to us. What have you done? What process are you in? Actually, towards the end, as they got closer to the deadline of our final presentation, then suddenly there was more motivation to try and find a time for them to meet, or more guidance. So maybe part of the group met and one time, and the other part of a group met at another time, but they knew what they were doing because next week they had to present their work formally, and so that gave them the pressure they did.
Now you've stressed that you were not focusing too much on content and outcomes, and you wanted them to find out about each other. But presumably during the 5 weeks, you had some topics, or you gave them some guidance. So what actually happened during that time, if you weren't focusing on the content and outcome? What were they doing?
So the only real guidance was, I mean, in terms of the initial project, was music and water. Do anything you want with that.
Aha. And
Go
what did
anywhere
they
you want with
do?
it. Just remember, we've got 5 weeks. Stay realistic. This was really, really important. We wanted them to bring to the table what they were most comfortable bringing to the table. And so, not surprisingly, and most of them did videos, a couple of websites, but in the videos, you know, there'd be a creative writing student in the class and who would write prose. In order for them to bring these very, very diverse, you know, abilities together, they needed to have that openness. And what we found was that, and it was a much more comfortable role to be in, was rather than telling them, it was more raising questions for them, like, you know, again, like the video, yeah, like, you know, so it's really great that you're planning to write a 3-hour opera, but do you have time? Like, maybe could you try this? Would this work? Would this work? So that we really were brainstorming with them. So again, the idea of creating an environment where we're all exploring and experimenting, you know, so they could find those connections, really, to a large extent, I think really did work. And as the feedback we got from the students was that it did, and that they felt comfortable with what they came up with.
Did they create lasting relationships? Do you think, have these students met each other in the flesh, or are there plans to? What happened at the end of
Oh,
that?
well, that happened. So that we've been talking about the first BGE. Now the second one just finished, and that was in person. So this is the one that we decided that we wanted to do the virtual exchange again, but we didn't really want to do it as a virtual exchange. We wanted to have some face-to-face. And so we worked on it for a while. I went to Italy and met with Cecilia and Stefania and actually talked to some potential students. I created a course called Music in the Environment, with the idea that they could still do the water thing, but music and environment being a concern, obviously, also center to everybody's universe. And our plan was to have virtual exchange at the beginning, or virtual part in the first part of the course.
Like a preparation to prepare
Yeah,
them for the actual physical.
exactly.
Ah.
And then in March, after our spring break, 7 Italian students, and Cecilia and Stefania, came to Maine and the students stayed for a week.
Wow.
Cecilia and Stefania were able to come because we gave them a Libra Scholar Award, which paid for them to come to UMF and visit, and that covered their part. And the students for that week did several things. First, they continued working on their projects in person. Second, they gave a concert of what they were doing at Colby College, which is about 45 minutes from here, and also at UMF, obviously. And during the week, they hung out at UMF and hung out with our students. There were all sorts of amazing things. On Monday night, our students cooked Maine food for them, so lots of blueberries and maple syrup and such, and chowders. And then actually, very interesting, the Italians, of course, did cook Italian food, but so there's a little story, but so they said they wanted to come in March, and I said, you know about Maine in March, we have a lot of snow, and
Oh, I see.
they showed up, and it was interesting. They were playing Vivaldi's The Seasons. They picked winter, which made total sense, because it was Maine in March. No snow when they arrived. Second day, we had a snowstorm. It was lovely. It was sort of like they played winter, and then we got the snowstorm. And then while they were at Colby and they were supposed to leave on Saturday, I was sitting and got a text from a friend of mine, said, have you looked at the weather report for Saturday? And we had a major nor'easter coming in, which means the state shuts
No
down.
flights, nothing.
And so I had to get them out of Maine. They were going down to Boston a day early. And so we very quickly figured a way to get them out of Maine within 24 hours. And the Italian students said, wait a minute, we're supposed to cook Italian food for the American students tomorrow night. we have to do it tonight. And so they commandeered one of the vans that had them at Colby College, and then they headed back early to Maine, cooked this marvelous meal. Our students came, carbonara and pesto, had an amazing, amazing time. It was such a lovely gesture. But there definitely were friendships that have formed and will continue out of this experience.
Well, I can imagine it sounds really intense because you had the virtual exchange as a preparatory event, you know, a few encounters before, then the physical mobility, and then all these kind of snowstorms and goodness knows what going on, which it kind of makes you come together, doesn't it? Because it's kind of an emergency, so people think on their feet and things come together. Are there any other highlights to this? And are you going to do it again? And
yeah.
what else
A
would you
lot of
like
it
to
was,
share?
what it really opened up was a lot of dialogues about the differences and similarities. And also, one of the things that's always amazing when you have outsiders come into your community is you start to see your community different. The Italian students were so moved by the sense of community that a residential campus had, and talked to me about that, you know, that there's this real supportive nature among the students, among each other. It was really cute. So the students created a game night at the dorm, right? And the Italian students went. And then there was a rugby game that some of the students got to see, women's rugby, and they got to see what that was about, and just sort of this wild, very different kind of thing. And then for this, my students, when on Friday, after hanging with these students, they kind of forgot that the Italian students were musicians. And then on Friday at the concert, all of a sudden, oh my gosh. And I actually looked at them. The first Italian performer was this marvelous singer from Pescara. And he opened his mouth. He was the first thing on the program. This gorgeous baritone voice came out. And I watched my students, their jaws drop.
I'm getting goose pimples
And then they
hearing
heard,
you.
yeah, each one of them, like, and my students commented on this later, said, oh my gosh, we kind of forgot that they do this in addition to all the stuff that they were doing. And so it was really, really powerful. And in the debriefing, the students were like, they would love to have this experience again. And, it was really, really powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's absolutely fascinating, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.